Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Titles for Tough Times, How Books Can Help Educators Support Social Emotional Learning, or SEL. I'm Heather Booth, the audio editor at Booklist. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some technical details. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question or if you need technical assistance, simply click the Q&A, type your message into the box that appears. We will do our best to respond to all tech-related questions, and we'll pass along all other questions to today's panelists so they can follow up with you after the webinar. Links to today's slides were sent directly to you from Zoom at the start of the webinar, but you can also download them at any time by copying the URLs on this screen into your web browser. Tomorrow, all attendees will receive a follow-up email containing links to today's slide presentation, a list of titles covered, a certificate of completion, and a video recording. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Maria Fez, Sheila Henline, Beth Saxton, who are all content specialists at OverDrive, and Edwin Tucker, who's an account manager at OverDrive. And with that, I'm going to introduce Maria, who's going to begin the presentation.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to kind of give an overview of what we're going to be talking about today before we get into it. Education has been emphasizing trauma-informed classrooms and social emotional learning for some time now. Not only are these topics being incorporated using in-class activities and homework assignments, more and more books are also featuring characters dealing with trauma and memoirs of those who have dealt with trauma, written or adapted for young readers. Characters go through changes throughout titles that encompass many of the key aspects of social emotional learning. We wanted to dive into our favorites for all ages. And then after that, we'll have a demo of OverDrive Sora app by the wonderful Edwin Tucker. And lastly, we'll wrap up by answering some of your questions. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Sheila, to get us started with books for kids.
Thank you, Maria. The 2020 pandemic has affected us all in one way or another. When we reflect upon this time, we see many forms of human compassion. What I'm simply amazed with is how our young people have reacted. In social media or network news, we see ways children are expressing their kindness, empathy, and sharing in the grief of others. From sending homemade cards to collecting food, our children are leading the way. So how do we reflect these forms of compassion and add to our social emotional learning titles in our digital library collections? I'll show you a few of my favorite titles, some new releases, and series that you may want to review for your Libby or Sora libraries. Next slide, please. Kindness and Mindfulness, my picks. Kindness is a Kite String by Michelle Schaub. It's a picture book that follows a young person spreading acts of kindness throughout the community. I'm a Kindness Hero by Jennifer Adams, a picture book following the adventures of a young boy as he practices kindness throughout his day. The Power of One by Trudy Ludwig. It's a picture book where we can watch as a chain reaction of kindness ripples throughout her school and community. I Am Peace by Susan Verda. This is a picture book, and Susan is a yoga instructor and brings a delightful presentation. This is my favorite series, and it would probably pop up again throughout this presentation. Mindfulness is being expressed through the beauty of the natural world. Breathe, taste, smell, touch, and be present. Being Present by Katie Marsico, part of the My Early Library series, My Mindful Day. Being Present explores the importance of connecting with others and focusing on the present instead of the future. My Thoughts Are Clouds by Georgia Hurd. These are poems for mindfulness. Through the use of poetry, mindfulness is examined and explored. You can also use this for Poetry Month. Kids' Random Acts of Kindness. This is a collection of submissions from students in their own handwriting about various random acts of kindness. Next slide, please. Let's review Feelings and Empathy. Empathy, again by Katie Marsico, again a part of that My Mindful Day series, is empathy explores the importance of listening and building friendships. You Are Enough by Margaret O'Hare. It's a picture book about inclusion. This one is inspired by Down syndrome advocate Sophia Sanchez. I Am Human by Susan Verda, another one in this series. A look at what it is to be human, imperfections and all. Big Feelings by Alexandra Penfold. This is a picture book from the creators of All Are Welcome. They help children navigate the emotional challenges they face in their daily lives. And lastly, Sharing a Smile by Nikki Kramer. This is also a picture book and one of the few that I found that is dealing with the face mask issue. Some of our students are just not happy with wearing the face masks. Next slide, please. Trauma and Grief. Lost in the Clouds by Tom Tindisbury. This one comes out in May, and this book explores grief and teaches children how to deal with loss and their emotions surrounding the death of a loved one. Many Points of Me by Carolyn Gertler. This one is an SLJ starred review and is a story about friendship, family, grief, and creativity. I Am Love by Susan Verda. I'm back to this series. This time we explore love and compassion, emphasizing living in gratitude and to take care of ourselves by practicing self-love. We all need this when experiencing grief. Compassion by Katie Marsico. Again, I find these titles to be reflective of our students as well as thoughtful in their presentation. Compassion explores the importance of dealing with pain and being kind to others. While not directly dealing with grief, compassion can start the conversation with our younger students. Grief Doodling by Harriet Hodgson. I was so happy to see this title. I know many people that study art therapy and its usefulness in trauma and grief situations. Grief doodling is a different approach to coping with loss. It gets tweens and teens to participate, think, set goals, and start walking a healing path. Next slide, please. Other special issues. Oh boy, there were so many and I couldn't stop at just one. I'm sorry. Okay, we begin with Parents Here and There by Marie-Therese Miller. I was happy to see a title that deals with this type of separation. Military deployment can be difficult for children to understand. Whether you have a military base nearby or supporting military spouses that return home for support during deployment, this title can be meaningful in every community. People of Pride by Chase Clementia. This is an upper elementary title, and it has nice brief bios of people who identify with this lifestyle. Be You by Peter H. Reynolds. Perhaps it's Perhaps it's his illustrations that have me returning to the titles that he has written or illustrated. This title, available in read-along format at OverDrive, Reynolds reminds readers to be your own work of art, to be patient, persistent, and true, because there is one and only one you. Counting Kindness by Hollis Kerman. This is a counting book that illustrates 10 ways to welcome refugee children. Teach children about refugees and how each kindness can help them find a new home. More than half of the world's refugees are children, and they're fleeing scary situations in search of a safe place to live. This title is endorsed by Amnesty International. Just Be You by Malika Chopra, who happens to be the daughter of Deepak Chopra. This is a terrific title for your tweens to help them understand their emotions and communicate in a healthy and productive way. Hear My Voice. These are testimonies of children detained at the southern border of the United States, and they're compiled by Warren Binford. This comes out in April. This is a picture book for older children and families that introduce this difficult topic and amplifies the voices and experiences of immigrant children detained at the border between Mexico and the US. The children's actual words from publicly available court documents are assembled to tell this heartbreaking story in both English and Spanish back to back. Each spread is illustrated in striking full color by a different Latinx artist. Finding Home, The Journey of Immigrants and Refugees by Jen Sukfong Lee. This is an upper elementary title that explores the current issues facing immigrants and refugees today and in the past. Some examples of what drives people to immigrate, such as war zones and politics. This is an own voice author, is a Chinese Canadian immigrant. Our Skin, A First Conversation About Race by Megan Madison, Jessica Raleigh, and Isabel Roxas. This is a very early reader, backed on the research that race, gender, consent, and body positivity should be discussed with toddlers on up. Back Matter offers additional resources and ideas for extending this discussion. And Kids on the March, 15 Stories of Speaking Out, Protesting and Fighting for Justice by Michael G. Long, an upper elementary title dealing with kids' activism. Kids on the March tells the stories of protests from the March of the Mill Children who walked out of the factories in 1903 for a shorter work week to 1951's Strike for a Better School, which helped build a case for Brown versus Board of Education. Up to the 21st century's most iconic movements, including March for Our Lives, the climate strike, and the recent Black Lives Matter protests reshaping our nation. Next slide, please. Lastly, I'll show you some of the series that are available. These are my picks, and there's a lot more than this, but I had to refrain somewhere. Okay, the first series we have is with the title We All Have Value, which is a story of respect. And this one's by Mary Shu, and other titles in the series are written by Kristen Johnson as well. These are stories with character. This is juvenile fiction from Lerner Publishing. There are 6 titles in this series, and this series uses realistic examples to teach social emotional skills to young children. When Is It My Turn? By Sandy Donovan. And Robin Nelson also writes a few of the titles in this series as well. This is juvenile nonfiction. Their read-alongs are available at OverDrive. There are 6 titles in this series, and it's called Show Your Character from Lerner Publications. And this book offers examples of several difficult problems and examines how to deal with them fairly. Keep Trying by Martha E.H. Rustad. These are read-along format at OverDrive. This is juvenile nonfiction from our Capstone Pebble publishers. There are many titles in this series, and I encourage you just to go through and explore. How to Deal by Ben Hubbard. Again, a Capstone Publishing title series. This is juvenile nonfiction, upper elementary. This is chapter book style, all in a read-along format. And this title emphasizes coping skills. There are 3 more in this series. Rabbi's Roar by Tom Percival. Again, in read-along format from Bloomsbury, USA. This is juvenile fiction. This is part of the Big Bright Feeling series. There's currently 5 in a series, and it's stimulating conversations about mental and emotional health, self-confidence, and coping. Making Good Decisions by Stephanie Fine. This is the Sky's the Limit series. There are 5 titles brought to you by, Jump Publishing. This is juvenile nonfiction, where readers learn the benefits of informed decision-making, as well as techniques for making good decisions. Politics and Civil Unrest in Modern America by Duchess Harris. This is a core library guide to racism in North America, and is a series brought to us by Abdo. There are 6 titles in this series that they have aligned to the Common Core standards and state standards I recommend for upper elementary. Okay, that's it. I probably overwhelmed you all, but now I'm proud to introduce my colleague, Beth Saxon, who I think is going to be discussing our teens and exploring titles for them. Thank you.
Thanks, Sheila. Yes, I'm going to talk about some titles for teen readers. Of course, we want kids that are going through trouble to get real qualified help, but we also know that it's not always realistic. Sometimes they just want to feel less alone. Sometimes they want a word to put to their feelings so they can take the first step. And sometimes they're just curious. And with the availability of ebooks, it kind of brings a new level of privacy. They don't have to worry about going to the checkout desk or people seeing the books that they're reading. So, 90% of YA fiction at this point has some tough topics content. So we're going to move a little quickly on those and focus on the nonfiction. Now, those of us who have worked with teens often see how they're drawn to some of the more extreme versions of tough topics. I like to joke about the ebook of The Perks of Being a Wallflower being the only one that ever comes back to the library. So what about some other titles, maybe a little more nuanced? It's also a good idea to keep in mind when we're talking about tough topics that some students might find them triggering in the actual mental health sense and not the internet troll sense. And some might not relate to the story since not everything is cookie cutter, but it's always a good start. All right, next slide, please. So first, some titles about mental health. Heads Up, Changing Minds on Mental Health by Melanie Siebert includes a guide to major mental health diagnoses, along with the ideas and resources. Plus, it considers the latest science around how inequality and trauma impact mental health. Don't Call Me Crazy is an award-winning anthology by Kelly Jensen. It's meant to start conversations about mental health and features pieces from celebrities like Kristen Bell and Nancy Kerrigan, as well as YA authors like Adam Silvera, Libba Bray, and Sean David Hutchinson. The Anxiety Survival Guide for Teens by Jennifer Shannon is written by a practicing therapist and is part of the Instant Help Solutions series from New Harbinger Press. This series addresses a large number of SEL and mental health related topics. Now, for mental health fiction, you have Highly Illogical Behavior by John Corey Whaley that deals with agoraphobia. The Weight of Our Sky is about OCD, but this is historical fiction from 1969, so she doesn't have the words to describe it. The Memory of Light by Francisco X. Stork is about a girl recovering from a suicide attempt in a mental hospital. Made You Up by Francesca Zappia deals with paranoid schizophrenia, and of course, Turtles All the Way Down by John Green that talks about anxiety. Next slide, please. So our next books deal with grief and trauma. We have When a Friend Dies, a book for grieving, a book for teens about grieving and healing. And I'm glad they keep updating this book. This one goes back a ways, but they keep making new versions. Teenagers especially need help coping with grief and loss. This sensitive book answers questions like, how should I be acting? How long will this last? And what if I can't handle grief on my own? The updated version also addresses the complicated emotions that go with the death of an acquaintance, as opposed to a close friend. It features updated resources and recommended reading, including information on suicide hotlines and other support. Grief recovery for teens focuses on the physical impact of emotions and how to work with your body against them. And PTSD Survival Guide for Teens has various strategies that teens can use to find control over their emotions. Fiction for Grief and Trauma, The Astonishing Color of After by Emily X.R. Pan is a beautifully written book about a teenage girl coming to terms with her mother's suicide. History Is All You Left Me is about a boy facing the death of his ex-boyfriend and his own mental health. Goodbye Days by Jeff Settner. What if you sent the text that led to a car crash that killed your 3 best friends? A Heart in the Body of the World is about the aftermath of violence. And I don't know if it's possible for a Prince Honor book to be underrated or underpromoted, but I feel like this one deserved to be one of the big, huge books, and it never quite got there outside of award series. Something Like Normal by Trish Doller is a teenager at the very end of their teen years, a young soldier home on leave after serving in Afghanistan. We move on to the next slide. It's Mind and Body. You Are Enough by Jen Petro Roy is about body image and eating disorders. This one is appropriate for your younger teens, and her fiction book Good Enough addresses the same topic, and that is an Own Voices title as well. Mindfulness and Meditation by Whitney Stewart, an overview of the history and practices of mindfulness, but it's careful not to sell itself as a quick fix or a substitute for real treatment. It also includes mindful use of social media, which I think most of us could probably use some improvement on. The Self-Love Revolution, Radical Body Positivity for Girls of Color looks at the body standards that are mainstream and how to challenge the unhealthy messaging with a mix of real-life examples and studies. For related fiction, Lila Lee's I'll Be the One is about a plus-size girl who wants to be in K-pop, and Gabby, a Girl in Pieces by Isabel Quintera. Body Talk is the most recent Kelly Jensen anthology, and it's best for your high school collection since there are some anatomical illustrations in there. Did you know that YA author I.W. Gregorio is also a urologist? She has a very informative section on male anatomy. Other contributors include Julie Murphy and gymnast Ali Raisman. It's not a perfect world, but I'll take it. 50 Life Lessons for Teens Like Me Who Are Kind of, Autistic by Jennifer Rose is essays from a young person with autism. So much about autism kind of ignores the voices of autistic people. We hear a lot about their parents' struggles in youth. So I wanted to include an Own Voices title there. And Winning with ADHD is another of those instant help solutions, and it's an Own Voices young person writing as a team with a pediatric neurologist. Our next slide is Sex, Sexuality, and Gender. So Queer, the Ultimate LGBTQ Guide for Teens is another book that keeps getting updated, thankfully. This is great for young people with questions, and sometimes we still have kids that don't have any place they can ask those questions safely. It is a little light on gender issues, so I'm also including the very straightforward guide Beyond the Gender Binary. It answers a lot of questions that often come up when talking about gender identity, and it's a pretty quick and easy read. It's actually a great title for us older folks to kind of get up to speed as well. The Big Questions, the book of Sex and Consent by Donna Freitas it's really an interesting book because it's not, how sex works. It's not a scare 'em celibate book. It's not a guide to STDs. Instead, it helps teens ask the questions to kind of help them understand their own sexual ethics and boundaries. It helps understand consent and kind of their philosophy around those kind of things. So fiction for sex, sexuality, and gender. Cemetery Boys, one of my favorites from last year. A trans boy is trying to prove that he is a brujo with the same magic as the other men in his family, but that kind of hits a snag when the spirit that doesn't go quietly is kind of cute. I Wish You All the Best has a non-binary main character. The Brightsiders by Jen Wild. If you want more than the G and L in your GLBTQ books, Jen Wild is a good pick. Also, if you miss YA that doesn't try to be a literary masterpiece and is just kind of a fun read, this is a great choice. She has bisexual main characters, genderqueer pansexual characters, non-binary characters. Darius the Great Deserves Better is a great book about relationships, boundary, and consent from the point of view of a teenage boy. And Claire Can's Let's Talk About Love has an asexual main character. Other books with asexual main characters include Before I Let Go and This Song Is Not For You. On the next slide, we're going to talk about books for racism and prejudice. Obviously a hot topic in all of our libraries right now. Social emotional learning is a great place to talk about these subjects, with a focus on empathy rather than the historical movements and acknowledging teens' own experiences with racism and discrimination. So you all know Stamped and How to Be Anti-Racist, so I wanted to cover a few other titles. The Black Friend on Being a Better White Person. So this is a less formal, more conversational look at things that many white people, especially if they live in predominantly white communities, may not realize have their roots in racism. Now, a lot of people will get upset about these titles, but really it's how not to be a jerk. Who wants to be a jerk? That's all microaggressions are just being a jerk based on race or identity. So I certainly think that many people my age would have been better human beings earlier if they'd had this as a teen. And So the next one is The Talk, and it's edited by Wade Hudson and Cheryl Wills Hudson. So a lot of popular books talking about race are not written for an audience of people of color. And so I wanted to include this one that talks about a wide variety of BIPOC experiences. So this includes contributions from Christopher Myers, Meg Medina, Grace Lynn, Renee Watson, Daniel Nayeri, and others. We Are Here to Stay talks to young people about their experiences coming to America from around the world. The original book would have included photos, but due to challenges of DACA and safety concerns in the last 4 years, the author decided to leave empty frames and anonymize the voices of the young people. So going into some fiction, a very new title, one of the good ones, is A Girl Who Is Grieving Her Sister, who was an activist blogger about race. So she decides to finish her sister's road trip along with her friends. How it went down, this is a couple years old. Kekla Magoon's multi-point of view novel about a police shooting didn't quite get the hype that some of the other books about this topic did, but it's excellent. Punching the Air is the story of a young man wrongfully incarcerated. We Are Not Free, an excellent book about Japanese internment and the teenage experience in Japanese internment. And of course, Samir Ahmed's Internment looks at the possibility of a Muslim internment and how that would look in modern day America. So thank you very much. I'm going to turn this over to Maria Fez, who's going to talk about some titles for older readers.
Thanks, Beth. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about maybe some less traditional titles that you may not think of that can kind of help with dealing with trauma, and as well as social emotional learning for teens, but also books that would do really well for adults as well. Next slide, please. So I wanted to get started with dealing with trauma, and I'm kind of focusing on dealing with trauma in other worlds and other cultures, and maybe also other time periods. First book I wanted to point out was Chosen Ones by Veronica Ross. This is fantasy, definitely good YA crossover, especially for fans of the Divergent series, but also even if you're not, because you really don't have to read any other Veronica Ross to enjoy this one. 15 years ago, 5 ordinary teenagers were singled out by a prophecy to take down an impossibly powerful entity wreaking havoc across North America known as the Dark One. The Chosen Ones, as the teens were known, gave everything they had to defeat him. After the Dark One fell, the world went back to normal for everybody but them. What do you do when you're 30 years old, carrying the weight of saving the world and trying to figure out where you now fit in it? Our main character from the group, Sloane, she's having the hardest time adjusting. She's struggling with PTSD. She's also harboring secrets that kind of alienate her from her other Chosen One companions. On the 10th anniversary of the Dark One's defeat, they discovered the Dark One's ultimate goal was much bigger than they, the government, or even prophecy could have foretold. This is filled with action, bad guys who might not totally be bad guys, and dark humor. Chosen One still doesn't stray from bringing home the streams of responsibility that kind of affect oneself, your relationships, and also it's a really good portrayal of how everyone deals with trauma differently. Yellow Wife by Sadeka Johnson. This just came out recently. I'm really excited about this one. I think it's going to do really well with a lot of age groups, and also with book discussion groups as well. Born on a plantation in Charles City, Virginia, Phoebe Dolores Brown has lived a relatively sheltered life. She's the biracial child, then referred to as High Yellow, of a proud African mother and fathered by their white owner. Shielded by her mother's position as the estate's medicine woman and cherished by the master's sister, she's set apart from the others on the plantation, so she's not really belonging to either world. She's been promised freedom on her 18th birthday, but before this happens, Phoebe is forced to leave the only home she has ever known. She's become a target of the plantation owner's jealous wife, and Phoebe's sent to a notorious jail where the enslaved are broken and tortured. She becomes the yellow wife of the disreputable white jail owner. So she's exposed to her husband's cruelty, but also his duplicitousness. He kind of is very contradicting, nice very sweet to her, sometimes very cruel to other times. And her dreams of freedom, protecting those she loves, grow more desperate with the birth of her children and the passing years. And to survive, she will have to outwit her husband and face a terrible sacrifice. This is perfect for fans of historical fiction or strong female characters. And it really details the journey of overcoming an abrupt and fundamental change in one's life. Another one that I really like, and I also, I mean, all these covers are great, but I really love the cover of Speaking of Summer by Felicia Buchanan. On a cold December evening, Autumn Spencer's twin sister, Summer, walks to the roof of their shared Harlem brownstone, never to be seen again. The door to the roof is locked, and the snow only holds one set of footprints. She's faced with authorities indifferent to another missing Black woman. Autumn pursues the search for her sister all on her own. With her friends and neighbors, Autumn pretends to hold up through all of this, but her loss becomes too great, the mystery too inexplicable, and Autumn kind of starts to unravel, all while becoming obsessed with the various murders of local women and the men who killed them. She thinks that their stories and society's complacency toward them might shed light on what really happened to her sister. So not only does this deal with the deeply personal trauma of the disappearing of a loved one, it also deals with the shared trauma of the Black community regarding the undervaluing of Black women in society. Another one that I think would really do well with teen readers is Eden by Andrea Klein. Every other weekend, Hope and Eden wait for their father to pick them up, as he always does, at a strip mall bus stop. It's the divorce shuffle, they're used to it. Only this weekend he screwed up and he forgot. And their world will irrevocably change when a stranger lures them into his truck with a false story and a smile. 20 years later, Hope is a struggling New York City playwright in her 30s. She discovers that the man who abducted them is up for parole, and the sisters might be able to offer testimony to keep him in jail. There's only one problem. Neither Hope nor anyone else in her family has been in touch with Eden for decades, and now that Hope needs to find her, Eden is nowhere to be found. Hope sets out on a harrowing quest across the country, and she has to turn to others from her own troubled past to track down her sister. So this is a lot about the lingering effects of trauma. I think sometimes when you have these time spans like this, it can kind of show how trauma affects people at different points in their lives and then how they deal with that years later. One other one, Bride of the Sea by Eamon Quota. This is a debut. This just came out recently as well, and it's part of it's set in Cleveland, and we're in Cleveland, so that's always fun as well. But Bride of the Sea follows Cleveland newlyweds Munir and Sadia through the ending to their brief marriage and its aftermath. In 1970, with a baby on the way and a lively extended family, a dark specter looms over the marriage of the two Saudi Arabian immigrants, as Munir has doubts about the permanence of their union. They end up divorcing, and Munir returns to Saudi Arabia, while Saida remains in Cleveland with their daughter Hanadi. Saida's overprotectiveness and fear of losing Hanadi spur her to disappear with her daughter, and Munir ends up spending years searching for his child. When Hanadi comes of age, she finds herself at the center of this conflict, torn between the world she grew up in and a family and father across the ocean. How can she exist between parents and between countries? The impact of this choice on these three lives and the way it affects the extended family dynamics is a key factor throughout this novel, which spans 4 decades. Hand this to readers to help them understand dealing with multi-generational trauma and the added pressures of religion, distance, and family. Next slide, please. So social emotional learning, when I first learned about it back, years ago, I always thought about it with kids. And I think there's a lot that can be good for adults and also, of course, teens as well, cultivating adults' own social and emotional competencies. There's also the need for adults to have the ability to positively model these behaviors, label emotions, and demonstrate empathy and positive relationships. So I think that can be really helpful as well. And like Beth said, with teens, sometimes they have a more established personality and sense of place in the present. So they may be more familiar with their strengths, and they may have conceptions that have kind of solidified their status in the world. So I think having some of these adult titles available to them can be really helpful. Liberty by Caitlin Greenidge, this comes out next Tuesday. It's a title I'm really looking forward to. An unforgettable story about one young Black girl's attempt to find a place where she can be fully and only herself. Coming of age as a freeborn Black girl in Reconstruction era Brooklyn, Liberty Sampson is all too aware that her mother, a practicing physician, has a vision for their future together. Liberty's going to go to medical school and practice alongside her. But Liberty is drawn more to music than science, and she feels stifled by her mother's choices and is hungry for something else. When a young man from Haiti proposes to Liberty and promises she will be his equal on the island, she accepts, only to discover that she is still subordinate to him and all men. As she tries to parse what freedom actually means for a Black woman, Liberty struggles with where she might find it for herself and for generations to come. There is growth that comes from finding yourself in a situation you thought would be better, only to find that there's still work to do. Liberty's coming of age, growing understanding of colorism, classism, racism, and patriarchy as she struggles to define what being free means for her. A couple less traditional picks maybe. I wanted to throw in All Systems Red by Martha Wells, which is the first book in Wells's Murderbot Diary series. This is part sci-fi thriller, part examination of free will and humanity. It's a great way to engage introverted teens, sci-fi readers who like to stick to their genre, and also those who might be willing to try something different. Murderbot, aka Spec Unit, has a tenuous relationship with humans. It's clear he cares about them to some extent past his contract, but also can't stand most human tendencies and really hates to be touched. Having an emotion is approached with disgust, but also with curiosity. Murderbot's reasoning when making decisions, while often humorous, is also a great representation of what goes on in our heads when we are put in situations outside of our comfort zone. Also, he's just like really hilarious. The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. This is one of my favorite books that I like to talk about as far as adult books for young adults. Linus Baker is a by-the-book caseworker in the Department of Charge of Magical Youth. He's content with his predictable life, even if it's a little lonely. But one day at work, he's tasked by extremely upper management with determining whether 6 dangerous magical children are likely to bring about the end of the world. Linus begins to question the methods when evaluating this orphanage, its wards, and its master. He also comes to notice during his time at the orphanage that he is capable of great things, even just by being himself, even not making a lot of changes, just being more comfortable in his own skin. It's a wonderful tale of found family, deserving happiness, and meeting the right people to help oneself come out of their shell. The other message of different people being no less important than those we consider normal is delivered to the reader in a delightful package of hilarious and insightful magical children. Couple others that feature maybe a little bit more extroverted characters. Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers. This is also a recent release. Grace Porter just received her doctorate in astronomy, and though she may not be practicing medicine, as her no-nonsense father intended, she is on track to put her doctorate to use. She's straight A, worked through the summer, high achiever, all that kind of stuff. She's not the kind of person who goes to Vegas and gets drunkenly married to a woman whose name she doesn't know until she does exactly that. This one moment of departure from her stern father's plans for her life has Grace wondering why she doesn't feel more fulfilled from completing her degree. Staggering under the weight of her parents' expectations, a struggling job market, feelings of burnout. I'm sure no one can relate to that right now. Grace flees her home in Portland for a summer in New York with the wife that she barely knows. In New York, she's able to ignore all the constant questions about her future plans and falls hard for her creative and beautiful wife, Yuki. But when reality comes crashing in, Grace must face what she's been running from, dealing with mental illness, family scars that need to heal, and the longing for connection, especially when navigating the messiness of adulthood. I love that this is a younger person in this, being the main character who has, tried to take steps to be successful, but is also still struggling with a lot of things. And last but not least, The Switch by Beth O'Leary. I will read anything Beth O'Leary writes, and while this book is on the lighter side, I just think it does a really good job of, finding oneself in a situation where you didn't, think you would be. Lena Cotton, already an overachiever, is working nonstop to avoid dealing with her sister's recent death. After a disastrous presentation at work, she is ordered to take a 2-month sabbatical and escapes to her grandmother Eileen's house for some long overdue rest. Eileen is newly single and about to turn 80. She'd like a second chance at love, but her tiny Yorkshire village does not offer many eligible gentlemen. So they decide to try a 2-month swap. Eileen will live in London and look for love. She'll take Lena's flat. She learns all about online dating, keeping things casual, and more on-the-go life, new neighbors. Meanwhile, Lena will look after everything in rural Yorkshire. Eileen's little cottage and garden, her quiet little village, and her little neighborhood projects. Stepping into one another's shoes proves more difficult than either of them expected. Will swapping lives help Eileen and Lena find themselves, repair other tenuous familial relationships, and maybe even find love? Like I said, while this book remains lighthearted, it also delves into emotional topics like grief and the importance of watching out for the people you care about. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Sheila, Beth, and myself today. Following the webinar, you'll be receiving a list of all the titles we mentioned, plus more titles we didn't have time to discuss today. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Edwin Tucker, a member of our education team, to show you all the awesome features of the Sora app.
Great, thanks, Maria. Thank you all. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for this demo. And so tons of great content, and it begs the question then, how do students access this content? And that's through our student app, Sora, S-O-R-A. Sora is available as an app. It's also a browser version. And students would log in with their student credentials. And once they've done that for the first time, they would come to the Explore tab. That's the default tab where they will land when they first log in. You'll notice there are 4 tabs in all: the Home, Explore, Shelf, and Me tab, and I'll get to those others in just a moment. So the Explore tab obviously is where they're going to explore the collection, whether it's a featured title like this one, A Girl Like Me, or curated collections that the school can put together. So 50 middle grade books to read in 2021. And you see that there are tons of great ideas, just lots of different types of, and there's social and emotional learning, PD content. So all sorts of different ways to think about this, different ways to organize the collection for students as they come to the app. So when they're looking for a title, they can browse these different groups of titles, or just do a straight search or a simple search or a more advanced search for a title in the search bar. Let's just say that this student is interested in The Bridge of Souls. And I'll also mention too that students can access this content by logging into Sora, but the individual titles like The Bridge of Souls and collections can be linked to from without Sora via the deep link that you see up here at the top. The URL acts as a deep link, so that can be copied, pasted on your website, in a Google Classroom, what have you, and it will direct students to an individual title, or say this group of titles here. So again, that URL operates as a deep link. So I, as a student, am interested in Bridge of Souls. If I click on the cover of the title, I get a summary of the title. I get some information about other reading that I might be interested in, other titles in the series. And it's just one click to borrow the title, and then I'm ready to read. From this point, it's pretty intuitive. You're just going to click to move along, to page along, and there are, the table of contents are hyperlinked, so I can jump ahead to chapter 1. And at that point, I can click on the middle of the screen in Sora and really personalize my reading experience. So I can start reading, of course, but if I want to really personalize this reading experience, I just click in the middle, I get access to some other options here. I can switch to a single page view, for instance, and switch back again. I can search for specific terms in this title. By clicking on this icon, the letter A, I can change my font size. As you see it, I can make it bigger or smaller as I like. I can change the background if I like sepia for whatever reason, or if I want reading at night, I can change that background. And while there's a publisher's default font style, you're not wedded to that. You can change to other font styles, whichever works for the individual reader. And there is an open dyslexic font available too. So with this particular font, the letters are spaced a little wider, they're weighted at the bottom, and this has been shown to help students with dyslexia. And all of these settings, all of these personalization settings are what we call sticky. So once they're set, they'll apply to all of this student's ebook titles, and they won't have to continue to go back and switch these over until they switch them back again. So I'm just gonna go back to the publisher's default, and then I can start my reading. Now, as I'm reading along, I might come across something that, a word, let's say, that I don't recognize, and I can get a quick in-app definition of the word. And of course, I can never find a really good word when I do this. Oh, here's a good one. So if I find a word, I'm not quite certain what it is, I'll hover over the word, hold and highlight the word right in the text. And then we get this little pop-up where I can click define to get a quick in-app dictionary definition of this particular word. And as I scroll down, I get hyperlinks out to other resources, in this case, the Oxford Dictionary, all sorts of different topics on this particular word. And then at the bottom, as I scroll down, I see some Google integrations that have been worked into Sora. So one in particular is Google Translate. So let's just say I'm not sure how to pronounce this word. I'm an English language learner, any number of different reasons I might want to hear this word pronounced. I can link out to Google Translate straight from Sora
alcove
and get a quick pronunciation of that particular word. So pretty handy option there. The same principle goes for making a highlight or an annotation. So if I'm wanting to highlight a particular section, again, I'll hover over the section, click to highlight, and now instead of just highlighting the one word, I'm just going to highlight the whole passage that I'm interested in. And now you see the second option down here, highlight, will allow me to make an annotation. I can choose a color if I'm color coding my annotations for whatever reason, let's say, and I can then make a note, something really clever like remember for class, and then save my note. And you'll notice now that this particular passage is highlighted in the text. So as I'm paging along or back, I'll see it. I can also click on the note itself and quickly see what my note was. And again, if I click on the middle to enable these options up here, the one in the top right will allow me to see all of my bookmarks, all of my highlights that I've made in the text. These are hyperlinks, so if I'm on page 300 or what have you, but I want to quickly get back to where I made that note, I can just click and it will hyperlink me back to this particular note where I can see what it was I wrote. So just a number of different options, a number of different things you can do within the text, but I'm going to very quickly now exit the text to show you what else I can access in Sora. From now, I'm going to pop over to the Home tab and show you the Home tab now is where I will see all of my the titles that I have checked out, or titles in the case of King Lear here that have been assigned to me. Here are my pleasure reading loans here, and there's Bridge of Souls. So I can quickly access all of my titles from this page. And as I scroll down too, I can see my recently defined words, a list of those, and here's alcove that I just looked up, and my recent notes and highlights. And here's that note that I made for Bridge of Souls. And what's great about both the recently defined words and these notes and highlights is that I can link over to see an entire listing of all of the notes I've made. And this is these are tied to my account, my student account. I do not have to have the title checked out to access these notes. Sora will keep track of all of my notes, whether or not I have the title currently checked out or not. And I can then organize these if I like. Say I was looking at my color-coded notes for whatever reason, and or I could look at a specific note for this Bridge of Souls. And with all of these notes, I can share them out. So let's say I wanted to share this particular note with my teacher. I can just click this share button up here and share it out, this note out as a PDF, a spreadsheet. I could copy it to a clipboard. In this case, I'm going to send this note to Google Drive. So I'm just going to click on that option. I can create a PDF or a text file of this note. I'm going to keep it with PDF. And it's a pretty quick process here. There we are. And here's the finished product, a nice, clean presentation of my note, a little bit of the passage that I highlighted there, and even the book cover. So just a nice way to share out notes and highlights to your teacher, what have you. So that's the Home tab. We looked at the Explore tab, and actually before I move on, Sheila had mentioned the read alouds, which are ebooks with an audio component. And I just wanted to quickly show you one of those. Here's a read aloud, Plant Secrets. And these are great. I'll show you here. I'll just demonstrate it.
Hidden inside each seed is a tiny new plant. Put the seed.
So this narration can be enabled at any point, or the student can choose to not enable the narrative and just read as they like. But they're all professionally narrated. There's none of the robotic sort of read back. It's all these are all professional actors. So these are nice additional titles that you can utilize. So that's the Home tab. We looked at the Explore tab and how to look for titles. The Shelf is simply a place where I can see an aggregate of all of my checkouts, how much time I have left on the checkouts. And then you'll notice this little green emblem with a white check mark. That little icon indicates that the title has been downloaded for offline use. So very important. Once the title, and this process begins as soon as the title is checked out. It takes just a few moments. As you see, Bridge of Souls is already downloaded. And that means that I can access these titles, either ebook or audiobook, offline. I do not need Wi-Fi at this point. So 24/7 access to titles. The reading or listening to audiobooks never has to end with Sora. So that happens immediately upon the title being checked out. Also from the Shelf tab, I can keep track of any holds I have, and I can create wish lists or likes and dislikes for my own personal use, just to keep track of what books I've enjoyed and so forth. The final tab along is the Me tab, and this is where some data points live in relation to me as a reader. So you'll see some totals, the total number of books I've opened, the total amount of time I've spent reading, and then some average times per session. Looks like I need to work on this a little bit, but just a nice way for the student to track their progress as a reader. There are also some achievements or badges that can be earned. There are 30 of these in all. The first 20 or so will just are badges that can be earned for doing different things in Sora. So in some ways it's a how-to from A to Z, how to work your way through Sora, earn a badge for each one of these things that you do. And then there are 10 badges that can be earned for finishing different genre of titles. So just a bit of fun there, another way for students to track their progress in Sora. Something we're really excited about though, and I'm going up to this main menu in Sora, is the ability to add a public library. So in this case, the Cuyahoga County Public Library here in Cleveland, I can access this public library's OverDrive content through Sora. So if I have a public library card, I can simply add my public library and check out titles through this portal. We talk in terms of content access levels for leveling content for students so that younger students are not seeing more mature content. That can be mirrored on the public library and as well as in the school side as well. So that capability is available. To check out, and you'll notice that this is not a new user experience. The public library content comes to the user in exactly the same format. There's not a new app to get used to. They're just simply accessing the public library content in the familiar Sora format here. So this is a little old probably for me. I'm logged in as an adult, but if I click on a title to check out, when I click the borrow button, instead of immediately checking out that title, I'm prompted to enter my library card. In this case, they also require a PIN. Once I've entered that the first time, Sora will remember that for all subsequent checkouts, and then I can start checking out titles from the public library. So a pretty exciting way to expand resources for schools and get students accessing the public library. And that is a very quick tour of Sora. So I'm going to stop sharing now so we can go back to the presentation. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you all so much. So many great pieces of information there, and what a great product. So we had a few questions come in regarding Sora. One was about accessing public library collections, which it sounds like we have just covered. Another question, can book collections be curated for a specific class?
Yes, absolutely. Really, there are an unlimited number of curations that can be created. This is done on the administrative end of OverDrive, which we call Marketplace, but teachers and LMS librarians can curate collections there that will appear in Sora, absolutely.
Great. Another question, can you talk about how you know if a book has a read aloud capability?
Good question. Yeah, when, again, I'll refer to Marketplace, which is that administrative end of OverDrive. There are, when you're searching for content, you can limit your search for just those read aloud titles and add those to a collection. We would then, as a best practice, probably suggest that you curate a collection and call it your read aloud collection, something like that, to drive students to those particular titles.
Okay, another Sora question. When you mentioned that the content students can view from the public library can be leveled, is that dependent on the public library's OverDrive settings, or is it filtered through Sora? Who has control over that?
Actually, that's something you can control on the school end, because the authentication to the public library is really is handled on the school side. What I mean by that is you can enable the leveling for your students in that portal from that particular login. So students would then be seeing just content that's appropriate to them.
Okay. Jumping back to the earlier part of the presentation, a panel or an attendee had a question about titles for the SEL issues relating to kids with incarcerated parents. Any suggestions?
Yes, this is Sheila, and I found one that says, tell me about when moms and dads go to jail. And this would be from Jessica Kingsley Publishers, and it's written by Judy Goozh, Goozh. We will be adding that to our list when we update it for you.
Yes, so the list that
And I
goes
think,
sorry.
oh, sorry. I was going to say one that I knew of that I think also somebody had mentioned in the Q&A was Missing Daddy by Mariam Kaba. So we'll put that in there also.
Yeah, be sure to check the list. It sounds like there's going to be a lot of great additional titles.
Yeah, on the fiction side, from the desk of Zoe Washington as well, if they just want something that, you know, fits that.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions come in. Another title came in from an attendee, The Night Dad Went to Jail. So that's another great title. A huge thank you to today's wonderful panelists. The information that you're getting tomorrow has contact information. So if there are questions that come in later, you are always welcome to contact any of the fantastic panelists that we had today, Maria, Sheila, Beth, and Edwin. Thank you all so much for taking the time to speak with us today and sharing those great titles and what a great product in Sora. Tomorrow, all attendees will receive an email containing links to today's slide presentation, title lists, including those few additional titles based on the questions that were asked, and a certificate of completion and a video recording of this presentation. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars and register for upcoming ones like these that are featured here. Booklist's digital edition is a format that pairs the page-by-page reading experience of print with the convenience of online access at booklistonline.com. If you're interested in subscribing, take advantage of this special webinar offer to get print, online, digital, and archive access to Booklist, all for only $75. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. One more thank you to our sponsor, OverDrive. This concludes today's webinar.